A quiet Texas street turned into a live courtroom when two imposters in tactical vests tried to detain a homeowner. But the man they picked wasn't just any resident. He was the FBI agent they never should have messed with. On a Saturday morning in Plano, Texas, the kind of morning where families mow their lawns and kids ride bikes along cul-de-sacs, Reginald Carter walked out of his two-story brick home with nothing on his mind but taking the trash to the curb. He didn't even make it 10 steps before he noticed 3 figures waiting at the edge of his driveway. 2 men in black tactical-style vests, patches that read "Community Enforcement" stitched across their chests, and standing between them was Linda Whitfield, the president of the Homeowners Association. She wasn't smiling. Neither were they. Reginald slowed, gripping the trash bag in one hand, and studied the trio. At first glance, they might have looked official to a nervous neighbor, but something about them didn't add up. Their vests were mismatched, one too big, the other with Velcro straps hanging loose. Their boots were scuffed, like they'd been bought secondhand, and the way they stood, too stiff, too rehearsed, set off alarms in his head. "Mr. Carter," Linda began, her voice sharp, as if she'd practiced this moment. "We need to talk." Reginald set the trash bag down calmly, resting his hands on his hips. "About what?" One of the men stepped forward. He was tall, pale, with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses that made it impossible to read his eyes. "Community enforcement," he said flatly. "You're in violation of neighborhood regulations. We're here to detain you until police arrive." The words dropped like a rock. "Detain me?" Reginald repeated, his tone low, almost amused. Linda crossed her arms tightly. "You've ignored repeated notices, and this has gone too far. We can't have someone undermining our community rules. These men are here to make sure you comply." Reginald raised an eyebrow, looking from Linda to the 2 so-called officers. "And what exactly are the charges?" The second man, shorter, broad-shouldered with a messy beard, pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest. "Property violations, non-compliance with HOA orders, unauthorized modifications to your driveway, loud gatherings, the list goes on." Reginald almost laughed. "So, you think that gives you the right to walk onto my property and, what did you call it, detain me?" The taller man's jaw tightened. "That's right. You can come peacefully or we'll make it harder on you." For a moment, the air was still. The neighborhood seemed to pause, like the world itself was listening. From a few houses down, Reginald caught a curtain shift. Someone was watching. Then another. He knew the pattern. Eyes behind blinds, phones in hand. Reginald took a slow step forward, his voice calm, but edged with steel. "Let me explain something to you. There is no such thing as community enforcement. You're not law enforcement. You don't have any authority here, and you're trespassing." Linda's cheeks flushed. "Don't talk to me about authority, Reginald. You think you're above the rules because of who you are. We've had complaints. We're opening. Doors cracked ajar. People were leaning over their porches, phones held up, eager to capture every second of what felt like a scene straight from a television show. A retired couple, the Hendersons, stood shoulder to shoulder on their porch across the street. Mr. Henderson shook his head, muttering loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Never seen anything like this. What's she thinking, bringing fake police into this neighborhood?" His wife whispered back, "I told you Linda would go too far one day." Reginald caught their words in fragments, but he kept his focus on the 2 imposters. His mind was sharp, cataloging every detail. Their sloppy gear, the way the taller man kept glancing down the street as if expecting backup that wasn't coming, the restless twitch of the bearded man's hands. They weren't professionals. They were actors in a play that was starting to crumble. From the sidewalk, a teenager named Marcus Johnson, Reginald had seen him shooting hoops before, raised his phone higher and called out, "Yo, Mr. Carter, I got you on live. Thousands are watching." The taller imposter snapped his head toward him. "Put that down," he barked, taking a threatening step in the boy's direction. That was the wrong move.
Reginald shifted instantly, cutting his body between the man and the teen. His voice sharpened, cold and steady. "You even think about touching that kid, and this ends right here." The imposter froze, realizing for the first time that Reginald wasn't intimidated, not even close. Linda, flustered, tried to regain her footing. "This is a neighborhood matter. None of you should be interfering." Her words carried, but they only fueled the crowd. A woman with a baby on her hip yelled from a porch, "Neighborhood matter? Looks like harassment to me." More voices chimed in. "This is wrong. Where'd you even find these guys? You can't arrest your neighbor for cutting his grass too short." The longer Linda and her enforcers stood there, the less control they seemed to have. What was meant to scare Reginald had turned into a scene where they were the ones on trial, judged by the eyes of every neighbor around. Reginald let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke again. "Linda, do you hear them? This isn't order. This is chaos, and you created it." Her jaw clenched, but her voice trembled slightly. "You're twisting this, Reginald. You've always been a problem, always bending the rules, ignoring the standards we worked so hard to build." He tilted his head, studying her. "No, Linda. The real problem is that you confuse control with leadership. They're not the same." That line carried through the block like a verdict. Neighbors shifted, whispering, nodding to one another. Phones kept recording, lenses catching every flicker of tension. The bearded imposter wiped sweat from his brow. He was unraveling. "Look, man," he muttered under his breath, "maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it." But his partner hissed, "No, we finish this." The taller man squared his shoulders, trying to look larger than he was. "Last warning, you either come with us peacefully or we'll use force." Reginald almost laughed at the absurdity. "You really want to do this in front of every witness on this street, with half a dozen cameras pointed at you? Go ahead, show the world who you really are." The taller man faltered. His eyes darted nervously at the glowing phone screens, at the murmurs rising in the background. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from all sides. Linda stepped forward again, desperation edging her voice. "Don't listen to him. He's manipulating you all. He thinks because of his job." Reginald cut her off sharply. "Careful, Linda." His tone wasn't raised, but it carried more force than her shouting ever could. The crowd hushed for a beat, as if everyone understood the implication. Reginald turned his attention back to the imposters, lowering his voice just enough that they had to lean in. "Listen to me carefully. You've got two options right now. You leave quietly and pray the police don't charge you with impersonation, or you keep pretending you have power and this street watches you get dismantled in real time." The bearded man swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Linda. She gave a tiny shake of her head, clinging to the illusion that she still had control. But control was slipping through her fingers like water. Across the street, Marcus shouted, "They're done, Mr. Carter. We all see it." His words fueled the crowd further, voices rising in agreement. Reginald stayed perfectly still, letting the neighborhood itself become his ally. He didn't need to flex or threaten. The truth was already exposing them one camera angle at a time. But as the pressure mounted and the block turned into a stage, the imposters made a choice that would push the standoff into dangerous territory. The air was thick with tension, charged by the collective judgment of the neighborhood. Reginald stood steady in his driveway, a pillar of calm, while the two men in vests fidgeted under the weight of 100 unseen eyes. For a brief second, it seemed they might fold. The bearded man's posture screamed retreat, his feet shifting toward the street. But the taller one, the one with the shaved head and mirrored shoeshids, wasn't ready to back down. He suddenly reached into his vest and pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. They clanked together loudly, the sound slicing through the chatter of the watching neighbors. The crowd gasped, as if they'd all felt the cold bite of those cuffs themselves. "You're under neighborhood arrest," he said, his voice cracking just slightly, betraying the bravado he was trying to maintain. "Don't make me put these on you the hard way." Reginald's eyes locked on the cuffs, then flicked back to the man's face. He spoke slowly, every word precise. "If you take one more step toward me with those cuffs, you're committing a felony. Impersonating an officer. Attempted unlawful restraint. That's prison time, not community service." His grip tightened, but his confidence wavered. The bearded partner whispered harshly, "Eddie, this is crazy. We can't actually cuff him. We'll get locked up ourselves." "Shut up," he snapped, his voice carrying across the driveway. Linda tried to salvage the moment. She raised her chin and projected her voice for the neighbors. "Don't let him scare you. This is a neighborhood, law-abiding community, and we have every right to enforce standards. He's just trying to bully his way out." But her words landed flat. The neighbors weren't convinced anymore. Murmurs of disapproval rippled across the street. Someone shouted back, "You don't have the right, Linda." Another added, "This isn't enforcement, it's harassment." Reginald leaned slightly closer to Eddie, his tone quiet but sharp as glass. "I've seen real cuffs. I've used real cuffs, and I know when a man is bluffing. Drop them now before this turns into something you'll never walk away from." Eddie's jaw worked furiously, his pride at war with the reality sinking in around him. The bearded partner tugged at his sleeve, voice trembling. "Come on, man. Cameras are rolling. We'll get fried for this." But Eddie shoved him back. "I said I've got this." He stepped forward, thrusting the cuffs out like a weapon. The crowd audibly recoiled, and someone screamed, "Call the cops!" Dozens of phones tilted, capturing every angle of the standoff. Reginald didn't move backward. He didn't flinch. Instead, he squared his shoulders and said in a low, steady voice, "You're one heartbeat away from destroying your life. Think hard before you take that step." For the first time, Eddie hesitated. Sweat beaded along his forehead, glistening in the Texas sun. His hand shook slightly, enough for everyone to notice. The authority he had tried to project was cracking like glass under pressure. Linda, desperately to regain momentum, shouted, "Do it! Don't let him scare you! Put him in cuffs! Show the neighborhood who's in charge!" Her words backfired. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A middle-aged man from 3 houses down yelled back, "Linda, you've lost your mind. You're not the police." Others chimed in, "This isn't enforcement, it's harassment." Reginald seized the moment. His voice rose just enough to carry, calm but commanding. "Everyone here sees what's happening. This isn't about rules or violations. This is about power, fake power. And these men are being pushed by someone who doesn't know the law, doesn't respect the law, and thinks intimidation is leadership." The bearded man dropped his gaze to the ground, shame washing over him. He muttered, "I didn't sign up for this." Eddie glared at him, then at Linda, torn between pride and fear. But before he could decide, Reginald stepped slightly closer, closing the space between them. His eyes were locked onto Eddie's, his voice dropping to that chilling register only professionals carried. "You lay one finger on me, and I promise you, the real police won't even have to ask me who you are. They'll already know because I'll walk them through every single mistake you've made in the last 10 minutes. You think you're intimidating me, son? I dismantle men like you for a living." The words landed like a hammer. Eddie froze, his arm locked in place, the cuffs dangling uselessly. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with a low rumble of approval. Voices overlapping. "He's right. Leave him alone. You're done." The street itself was choosing sides, and it wasn't with Linda or her imposter enforcers. Reginald let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke again. "Here's the truth. This is the end of your game. You don't have authority. You don't have power. And the longer you stand here pretending you do, the deeper the hole you're digging."
The man backed up another step, visibly unraveling. Linda, however, looked like she might explode, her face flushed red, her voice breaking into a shriek. "You don't belong here. You never have. That's why you're fighting so hard." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. The neighbors' murmurs sharpened into outrage. Someone yelled, "That's enough, Linda."
Another voice, louder this time, "You're exposing yourself." Reginald kept his composure, but the sting of her words wasn't lost on him. He looked at her for a long moment, disappointment clear in his eyes. Then he turned back to Eddie and his partner. "Take my advice. Walk away now, because the next chapter in this story doesn't end with you walking home. It ends with flashing lights, handcuffs, and charges you won't be able to explain away." But Linda wasn't ready to quit, and her desperation was about to push the imposters into making their most reckless move yet. The standoff had reached a boiling point. Eddie still clutched the handcuffs like a lifeline, his arm hovering mid-air as if he couldn't decide whether to swing or drop them. The bearded man, whose name Reginald overheard in a muttered exchange as Sean, looked ready to bolt, and Linda stood at the center of it all, red-faced and trembling with rage, barking orders that no one seemed willing to follow anymore. Reginald took a breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then he spoke in a voice that was neither loud nor threatening, but carried the weight of authority. "Eddie, Sean, let me ask you something simple. Do you even know what happens to a man who impersonates a federal officer? Forget state charges. Forget HOA bylaws. I'm talking about federal law. Do you know the minimum sentence?" Eddie blinked behind his mirrored shades, his lips parting like he wanted to answer but couldn't. Reginald didn't wait. 3 years. That's minimum. And that's if you're lucky. If you escalate, if you touch me, we're talking more. Assault, false imprisonment, conspiracy. Do the math. Sean's eyes widened, the fight draining out of him with every word. "Linda, he's not joking," he whispered harshly, but everyone nearby still heard it. Linda snapped back. "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing. He wants you scared, so you back down." Reginald shifted his gaze to her, calm but cutting. "You've already lost, Linda. The crowd knows it. Your neighbors know it. And deep down, you know it too." The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman holding her toddler muttered, "He's right. This is insane." Eddie's hand finally dropped, the cuffs hanging at his side like deadweight. But Reginald wasn't finished. He stepped forward, closing the distance, and his tone changed, calm, conversational, but laced with that sharp precision of a man who had stared down cartel lieutenants without breaking a sweat. Reginald asked, his eyes moving from Eddie to Sean to Linda. "Do you know what separates real authority from fake authority? It's accountability. Real officers answer to the law. Fake ones answer to their pride, and pride will get you killed or locked up." The line hit Eddie like a strike. He shifted uncomfortably, sweat dripping down his temple. Reginald continued, his voice carrying for the neighbors who were still filming. "This community deserves better than fear tactics. They deserve honesty. They deserve leaders who solve problems with respect, not intimidation." Linda let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Respect? Don't lecture me about respect. Do you know how many hours I've poured into this neighborhood? Do you know how many complaints I've had to field? People want order, Reginald. They want someone to stand up and keep things proper. Order doesn't come from force. It comes from trust. And trust is gone the second you drag in imposters with fake vests and threaten your neighbors." Eddie swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe he's right, Linda. Maybe we should just go." "No," Linda snapped, spinning toward him. "If we walk away now, we lose everything. Everyone here sees this. They'll think I can't handle my job. Do you want that?" Sean finally spoke louder, his patience gone. "You think this is about your reputation? I'm not going to jail for you, Linda. I didn't sign up for this mess." He ripped the Velcro patch off his vest and tossed it onto the pavement. The cheap fabric fluttered against the driveway like a confession. Gasps rippled through the neighborhood. Phones zoomed in. The illusion was breaking apart piece by piece. Reginald's gaze returned to Eddie. "That's one down. What about you?" Eddie's hands trembled, the cuffs hanging at his side like deadweight. For the first time, his bravado cracked enough for Reginald to see the scared man behind the mirrored shades. "Think carefully," Reginald pressed, his voice low, almost intimate. Linda won't be there when the police start asking questions. She won't sit beside you in the courtroom. She won't do your time. She'll save herself. And you'll be the one wearing real cuffs." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Eddie finally let the handcuffs slip from his hand. They clattered against the pavement, the sound ringing louder than Linda's protests. "No!" Linda shouted, stomping her foot like a child denied candy. "Pick them up! Don't let him win!" But Eddie didn't move. He backed away a single step, his chest heaving with the weight of regret. That took the moment to drive the final nail in. He straightened, looking directly at Linda. "Leadership isn't about winning, Linda. It's about responsibility. And you've failed yours." The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with a rising tide of voices. "He's right. She's gone too far. We don't want this in our neighborhood anymore." Linda looked around, her face pale now, realizing the power she thought she had was slipping through her fingers faster than she can grasp it. Reginald bent down, picked up the handcuffs Eddie had dropped, and held them up for the crowd to see. This is what happens when you confuse control with justice, when you mistake fear for respect. But this isn't justice, it's fraud. The cuffs gleamed in the sun as if to punctuate his words. But before the neighborhood could fully absorb what had just happened, Eddie made a reckless choice that threatened to turn words into violence. The tension should have broken when the cuffs hit the ground, but Eddie wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't let him walk away. With sweat dripping down his temple and his chest rising sharply, he lunged forward, pushing past Sean and closing the gap between himself and Reginald. The crowd gasped in unison, phones tilted, capturing every angle. Someone yelled, "Don't touch him!" But Eddie either didn't hear or didn't care. He reached for Reginald's wrist, intent on forcing the cuffs back into play. That was his final mistake. In one fluid motion, Reginald's training kicked in. He sidestepped, seized Eddie's arm, and twisted it behind his back with surgical precision. The cuffs that Eddie had dropped moments earlier were now in Reginald's hands, snapping shut around Eddie's own wrists before the man could even process what had happened. Eddie cried out, more from shock than pain, and stumbled to his knees. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds, and the crowd roared with disbelief. Someone yelled, "Did you see that?" Another voice echoed, "He didn't even fight back. He just moved." Reginald didn't gloat. He simply held Eddie in place with minimal force. His voice calm, professional, as though he were conducting business. "You're done. Don't resist. It'll only make it worse." Linda's face twisted in horror. "What are you doing? You can't arrest him!" Reginald's eyes snapped to her sharp and cold. "You're right. I can't. But I can detain him for impersonating an officer until real law enforcement arrives. And considering he just attempted to assault me on my own property, the charges keep stacking." The crowd erupted again. Some clapped, others shouted in outrage at Linda. "You set this up! You pushed them too far! This is on you, Linda!" Sean, who had already stripped off his vest, took several steps back, his hands raised. "I'm out. I'm done. I didn't sign up for this." His voice cracked with genuine fear. "Lady, you never told us he was law enforcement." Reginald's voice cut through, calm and steady. "That's because she didn't know." Linda blinked, momentarily disarmed. "What are you talking about?" Reginald straightened, keeping Eddie restrained with one hand. His other hand reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with practiced ease, holding it high enough for everyone, including the dozens of cameras pointed at him, to see the gold badge glinting in the sunlight. "I'm Special Agent Reginald Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The street went silent. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and Eddie's ragged breathing as he knelt cuffed on the driveway. The neighbors stared, their shock tangible. Mrs. Henderson across the street clutched her husband's arm and whispered, "I knew he carried himself different." Marcus, the teenager, still filming, shouted, "No way! FBI! He's FBI!" The phones caught every second. The badge, the authority in his voice, the look on Linda's face as the truth sank in. Reginald's eyes never left her. You came onto my property with imposters, Linda. You endangered your own neighbors, thinking intimidation would give you control. But you didn't do your homework. You had no idea who you were dealing with." Her lips quivered, but she tried to recover. This is abuse of power. You can't just—" He cut her off, his voice like steel. "Abuse of power? That's rich coming from the woman who staged a fake arrest over my property line?"
An HOA dispute. What I'm doing is lawful. What you did is criminal. The neighbors murmured again, this time with an edge of disgust. Every word Linda tried to speak only buried her deeper in shame. Reginald adjusted his grip on Eddie and addressed the crowd. "Let's be clear, this isn't about lawn height or driveways. It's about people pretending to have authority they don't. People who think fear is leadership. That ends today." Eddie groaned, his pride shattered, while Sean stood frozen on the edge of the driveway, looking like he wanted to melt into the ground. Linda finally shouted, desperation boiling over. "You're making a spectacle of this! You're humiliating me!" Reginald's expression softened, though his tone didn't. "No, Linda, you did that yourself. You let pride blind you. You put this entire neighborhood at risk because you couldn't stand the thought of losing control." Phones kept rolling. The evidence was undeniable. Eddie was breathing heavily now, sweat soaking through his shirt, while Sean looked like he might run at any moment. Reginald's badge glinted again in the sunlight, a reminder that the game had shifted completely. "Here's the part you need to understand," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from service, from protecting people, not intimidating them. And when you fake authority, when you cross that line, there's always a reckoning." Linda shook her head violently, her denial collapsing into a desperate plea. "This isn't how it's supposed to go. You weren't supposed to fight back." Reginald met her eyes one final time, and his words landed like a hammer. "That's because you never expected to meet someone who knows what real authority looks like." The neighborhood was silent again, stunned by the revelation. Cameras zoomed tighter. What had started as a petty HOA stunt was now national news material. But the situation wasn't over yet, because real police sirens were already echoing down the block, and the truth was about to become official. The sound of sirens rolled down the block, sharp and undeniable, breaking through the hot Texas air like a warning bell. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, growing brighter with each second. The neighbors stirred, shifting from their porches and sidewalks, their phones tilting to capture the moment that would decide how this standoff ended. Eddie knelt on the driveway, hands cuffed behind him, his bravado completely gone. Sean had retreated to the curb, head in his hands, muttering curses to himself. And Linda, her face pale, her voice shaky, was trying to hold on to whatever control she thought she still had. You can't do this," she stammered. "The police will side with me. They know me. I'm the president of this HOA." Reginald adjusted his stance, keeping Eddie restrained with ease. His voice was steady, matter of fact. "Linda, the only thing they'll know is that you called in imposters to intimidate a homeowner. And they'll know because your whole neighborhood watched you do it." He tilted his chin toward the crowd. "Every single phone out here is evidence." Linda glanced around wildly. It was true. Neighbors on all sides had their cameras up. Some whispered into phones, likely live streaming. Others simply recorded, capturing every word, every flicker of panic on her face. The Hendersons, still on their porch, shook their heads in disbelief. "She's finished," Mr. Henderson muttered. His wife nodded. "It's all on tape." Reginald leaned slightly toward Eddie, who was trembling. "Stay still. When the officers arrive, I'll turn you over. Don't make this harder on yourself." Eddie didn't argue. His fight was gone, replaced by the dread of what was waiting for him once the flashing lights reached the driveway. The crowd buzzed louder as the patrol cars finally pulled up. 2 of them, tires crunching against the asphalt as they parked diagonally across the street.
Doors opened and uniformed officers stepped out, hands near their belts, eyes scanning the scene with suspicion. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked. Reginald immediately raised his free hand, still holding Eddie securely with the other. His voice was calm and clear. "Officers, I'm Special Agent Reginald Carter, FBI. Badges in my pocket, identification ready. The man in my custody attempted to impersonate law enforcement and assaulted me on my property." The officers hesitated, their eyes darting from the badge glinting in Reginald's wallet to the neighborhood full of witnesses. One officer, a broad-shouldered man with dark hair, stepped closer, his hand out. "Let me see your credentials, sir." Reginald nodded slowly, reaching into his pocket and producing his ID. The officer studied it carefully, then looked back at Reginald. Something in his face shifted, respect mixed with relief. "All right," the officer said firmly. "You're good. We'll take him from here." The crowd buzzed again, relief mixed with excitement. Phone zoomed in as the officers lifted Eddie to his feet, cuffed behind his back, and walked him toward the squad car. Linda's voice cracked, desperation pouring out. "But no, he's not the criminal here. Reginald is. He's twisting everything. You have to believe me." Another officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, stepped toward Linda. "Ma'am, we've got multiple witnesses, and from what I see, this looks very bad for you. Did you authorize these men to act as law enforcement?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. The crowd murmured louder, neighbors calling out, "She brought them here. We saw it. She told them to arrest him." The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're going to need to step aside. If you continue to interfere, we'll have to treat this as obstruction." Linda's shoulders slumped, her fight draining. Her authority, once proud and absolute in the eyes of her HOA board, meant nothing under the flashing red and blue lights. Reginald kept his composure, standing tall as Eddie was loaded into the back of a squad car. Sean stood off to the side, hands raised nervously, muttering, "I didn't touch anybody. I swear I'm done. I just want to go home." One officer approached him. "We'll need your statement. Don't move." The crowd was no longer silent. Neighbors whispered, cheered softly, or simply stared, unable to believe the spectacle that had played out in their quiet community. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide, taking in the lesson that authority could be faked and exposed. Reginald finally spoke, his voice rising just enough for the neighbors to hear. "This is why you don't let fear dictate your choices. Real authority doesn't hide behind fake vests and intimidation. It serves, it protects, and it answers to the truth." The younger officer glanced at him with something close to admiration before turning back to her unit. But Linda couldn't let go. She shouted one last desperate plea. "You think you've won, Reginald, but people like you don't belong in neighborhoods like this." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some voices shouted back immediately, "That's enough, Linda. We all heard you. You've lost your ounce of respect." Reginald didn't react with anger. He simply looked at her with quiet disappointment. "You just told everyone exactly who you are, and that'll stay with you longer than anything I could ever say." Phones captured her collapse. Her neighbors turning away from her, shaking their heads, muttering under their breath. Linda, the once proud president of the HOA, now stood exposed, isolated, her authority shattered. But as Eddie sat in the back of the squad car and Sean prepared to give his statement, the fallout of Linda's actions was only beginning, and the neighborhood was about to reckon with the damage she had caused. By the time both patrol cars were parked and Eddie was sitting cuffed in the back of one, the neighborhood had transformed into something close to a courtroom. Neighbors clustered at the ends of their driveways, whispering, pointing, filming, their voices a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. The hum of squad radios crackled through the air, blending with the steady wail of a siren still winding down. Officer Ramirez, the broad-shouldered man who had taken Reginald's ID earlier, stood at the center of the scene, speaking in a low voice with his partner, Officer Green. Every so often, their eyes flicked toward Linda, who was pacing like a caged animal, muttering under her breath and shaking her head. Reginald stood calm and upright near his front steps, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He hadn't moved since Eddie had been loaded into the squad car, and he didn't need to. His stillness radiated more authority than Linda's frantic pacing ever could. Finally, Officer Ramirez walked over to him. "Agent Carter, appreciate your cooperation. We've confirmed your credentials with dispatch. From the looks of it, you handled this situation by the book." Reginald gave a slight nod. "My goal was to keep it from escalating further. He came at me with cuffs. I had no choice but to detain him until you arrived." Ramirez sighed. "Well, the good news is, we've got everything on tape. Between your neighbor's recording and our body cams, it's a pretty airtight case. Impersonation, unlawful restraint, trespassing, conspiracy. We'll let the DA sort the charges." Reginald glanced at Linda, who froze under his gaze. "And don't forget instigation," he said evenly. Ramirez followed his look. "Yeah, we're not ignoring her role." He raised his voice toward the younger officer, Green. "Bring her over here." The crowd murmured again, buzzing with anticipation. Officer Green approached Linda. "Ma'am,